Raise your hand if you have a friend that believes in racial equality. Now, raise your hand if you have a friend that has bought or has been given skin lightening or whitening soap or lotions also. You have both hands raised, then this video is for them, and you know what? Really for all of us. White people are not the only perpetrators of racism in America. You can't rally for racial equality and at the same time hate the color of your own skin. How many of you had Asian parents that told you, don't stay out in the sun too long because you'll get too dark? How many of you had Asian parents that bought you lightening soap so you wouldn't look so brown? Just look at the Asian cosmetics companies on YouTube or on the internet where they sell you skin whitening products so you won't be so tan. When you go to the mall and you see all these cosmetic stores run by Asian companies, what do the models look like in the pictures and all their posters? I bet they're bright white and translucent. Don't you think that it's wrong that Asian culture still thinks that being bright and white is better than being tan? Why? So here's why in Asian culture they think being brown is bad. It all comes from a colonial attitude. So when colonists came over and they colonized Asia, if you were a farmer, then you worked the fields, which meant you got a nice healthy tan. But when colonists came over, they hired farmers, so they were naturally more light-skinned. Now that was a separation of socioeconomic class. That is to say that if you had money, you were more light-skinned because you were indoors and you paid people. And if you were a hardworking person, you had a nice healthy tan, then you're supposed to be on the more poor side. And so this attitude of being darker skinned and having a tan meant that you must be lower class and you must be poor. So I want you to now consider how this perpetrates forward, right? I want you to think about like Bollywood films and Korean dramas where the protagonists in these films are very light skinned and the antagonists are very dark skinned. You see it. You watch these shows and then you see it. And that is the association that carries through. In fact, even in Filipino culture, there's something called papaya soap.
So papaya soap is kind of like a whitening agent. So it's in the form of a soap, but I think it has like papaya ingredients in it. I don't know, maybe kind of like vitamin C, how vitamin C lightens your skin. So they kind of use it as a bleaching agent for your skin.
In fact, Johnson & Johnson recently announced on the 20th of June in 2020 that would stop selling whitening lotions and creams in Asian markets. How ironic that Asian people who have suffered from racial injustice want to look like the same people that caused the injustice in the first place. In fact, in Asia, a lot of people are getting surgeries to look more Caucasian. So here's what this video is about today. My guests will share their experiences on camera growing up.
Hi, I'm Rose Panetta.
My name is Hana.
Hi, my name is Jane.
I am primarily of Filipino descent, and I just wanted to come on here and talk about this topic just because it's kind of ingrained in my culture. So,
And I am a first year student in college, or I just ended it.
Jane, so tell us about your family or your friends and how do they think about light versus dark skin?
My parents, especially like my mom or like the aunties and everything, they would say like, "Oh, you're so dark. Like, did you guys come from the beach or just play tennis? You should put sunscreen on more." And my mom would always tell me to like stop going outside as much so I can get lighter.
So growing up, primarily we were in a neighborhood of mostly Filipino and Asian culture and surrounded by other Asian cultures as well. Growing up, it wouldn't be blatant like, oh, you're dark, and like it was indirect and subtle. So it would be like, well, you shouldn't be playing outside in the sun too long because, your skin would get dark.
My parents, they don't care about whether someone's like lighter or darker than them. All they care about is like their personality. But for them towards me, they would be like, "Oh, you need to like stop going out in the sun so much. Like, I want you to stay home to have like lighter skin." Because they immigrated from China and they used to work on a farm. They're like kind of dark, and my mom, she's not as dark because she immigrated early. So she would be like, oh yeah, if you have darker skin, then like people know you're poor because you work on a farm, you have to be out in the sun doing low income labor. But if you have lighter skin, then you would be seen as like someone richer who can stay inside and like have an office job which is higher up.
Yeah. So how did that make you feel though, growing up, knowing that you shouldn't go out in the sun?
I thought it was really strange because everyone else, like in Hawaii, everyone else is like pretty tan, and that's like a norm here where like you kind of want to look darker, so you look a little bit maybe healthier, only because it looks like yeah, like a lot of vitamin D, and like you just look a lot happier as well.
Like as a child, you don't really think about it that much because it's like you kind of, like children kind of take things with like a grain of salt. It's like, bouncing off you. It's like, oh, whatever, like you're just an adult. Like I'm not going to listen to you. But then it would start to impact like my day. And then I would come into the habit where it's like, instead of them kind of conditioning me, and then instead of them telling me, like I would say it, like, oh, I can't be outside longer than 30 minutes because I'll get dark.
When I played tennis, I was like at like my darkest, and so usually after practice, me and my friends would be like, "Oh, look how dark we got after a match," and we would see like our tennis tan lines and everything. And then I would come home and my mom would be like, "Oh, you're so dark. How long did you play tennis for? I think you might have to stop playing tennis so you wouldn't be so dark." And I kept telling her like, "Why do you keep saying that? Like, what's the problem? Like, I don't understand what's so bad about being dark. Like, having color isn't gonna define you as a person."
I did cross country and track in high school, and that was when like I looked the like absolutely darkest of my life. Because after I came back from the mainland, I got a lot whiter, and my mom was like, "Wow!" And then whenever I went to the beach, she would like try to make me put on lots of sunscreen, and if I got like red or pale or not pale, maybe like my skin's peeling, she would be like, "Oh my god!" And she would like put lotion all over me just to like prevent me from getting too dark.
Looking back at it, because looking back at it, it's really funny because it's like, oh, we didn't notice when we were younger that we had this collective experience where it was like, oh, you can't be outside for longer than 30 minutes because you'll get dark or you'll look dirty or whatever.
And that's very interesting that you say that, like, quote, "You'll look dirty," right?
Yeah.
So do you think there's some inherent racism in Asian culture?
Oh, absolutely. Like I didn't think of it as racism because as a kid you don't really know those kinds of things, which is hard to kind of call out, right? So I can't be a kid and call out like, "Hey, mom and dad, that's racist what you just said to me." But like after being an adult and kind of talking about life experiences with other people, it's kind of interesting to be like, oh, like my parents would hate it if I look like this, or like I can't, like we would always have papaya soap at home, and like she would be like, oh, you need to use this on your armpits or like your legs where it rubs like in between your elbows or whatever. And it's just really strange. It's like, well, I didn't really question it because it's like, it's my mom, right?
If we think about like white America and black America, and there's like, Asian people are kind of like on the sideline, just really being quiet about this entire thing. And we're just watching these two cultures. Do you think it's a problem? I mean, no one really addresses Asian racism, right? And we have to kind of agree that there is. And as you've shared,
Yeah.
we it's almost like it's hidden.
I think ever since the whole protesting happened, a lot of people would post it on their Instagram stories and Twitter, and I would read it. And it didn't sit right with me when those people would just repost what another person would say, knowing that when I talk to them in real life, they would be like saying the N-word casually or being racist to like another group of people. And I was kind of saying like, that doesn't seem right.
In elementary, there's like this certain point of time where like I didn't tell anyone like what I truly was because I was like embarrassed of it. There would be like this kid who's like Japanese, and then I remember I spoke to my grandma in Chinese when she came to pick me up. Like later on, this kid would be like, oh, you're Chinese, like you're like really dirty or something. And I was like, I don't get how that makes me dirty just for like being Chinese. And then later on when I was like older, I realized there were like stereotypes on like Chinese people. And then also, I think like all of freshman sophomore year, I've never told like any of my friends like what ethnicity it was because I was embarrassed of it. In China, they did have like this McDonald's that was like, oh, black people aren't allowed in. And then my mom saw that. She's like, that's like not the right thing to do since we're all like humans.
How much of a problem do you think this is?
I think it's a huge problem. It perpetuates this cycle of like self-hate and like, like self-racism, if that's even like a term that exists. But I mean, like, just if there's a culture that looks at them that in a classism way where it's like they have the tone of your skin, like if you're dark, you're seen as someone who works in the field, which is essentially what the comparison is, right? In the Philippines, if you're dark skinned, you're working in the field, you're working on a farm, so you're of lower class, you're of poverty. So if you're light, you have the luxury or the privilege to be inside all the time, not exposed to the sun.
Do you think that Asian people in general are racist, but they don't, they try to reserve it, they try to stay out of the limelight?
Yeah, I honestly think that racism isn't like you're not born from it, you're taught it. And so I think a lot of Asians aren't like used to seeing like dark colored people or Asians, and so like they'll usually think like, oh, white is more pretty and white's more like superior, so let's be light skinned.
Like, what is this one final thought that you'd like to give them? What's one piece of advice?
Love the skin you're in, love who you are in its whole, right? You can't just love bits and pieces. You gotta love the weaknesses, the strengths, that's what makes you unique.
Well, Hannah, thank you very much for participating in this interview, and I really appreciate
Thank
you
you.
sharing. Jane, thank you very much for being here today. I appreciate it. Rose, thank you very much for being with us today, and I appreciate all of your comments and answering all the questions. Thank you for being part of this interview.
Thank you. It was fun being here.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll see you later, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Our guests today have given you a lot to think about. We have this very covert racism in Asian culture that no one really talks about or wants to deeply explore. I want you to leave comments below and you tell me what you think. And especially if you grew up in an Asian household and you want to share after, I'd be happy to listen. I have a lot of off-the-record comments from others that told me that they've experienced the same thing growing up in their households, where they were scolded or even hit if they got dark. And that's pretty sad. So if you haven't subscribed to this channel already, please go ahead and do so. It means a lot to me. It doesn't cost you anything. Just hit that subscribe button. And I want to thank our guests, Jane Dang, Hannah Lee, and Rose Panetta for being here today. Until next time, I'll see you later. Bye.